Well, good morning. We're all scampering in to gather for this hearing that we're delighted to be holding, and we want to welcome everyone to the hearing. It's entitled Providing the Tools for Scientific Discovery and Basic Energy Research, the Department of Energy Science Mission. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth in testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. Again, we're delighted that you're here, and I am going to now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The Department of Energy is the lead federal agency supporting fundamental scientific research for energy and the largest supporter of basic research in the physical sciences. It funds basic research at universities, owns world-class national laboratories, and makes available unique scientific user facilities to conduct groundbreaking research. These fundamental science and basic research activities provide the underpinnings of America's long-term economic competitiveness and result in scientific discoveries which change the way we look at the natural world. This scientific research has led to 113 Nobel Prize winners affiliated with the DOE or its predecessor agencies. We must continue to pursue this standard of international excellence. A vibrant scientific ecosystem fosters innovation and discovery. The department should continue to work with its academic, national lab, and industry stakeholders to achieve this goal. This includes providing the tools to the national laboratories to reduce bureaucratic paperwork and regulation, as we heard in an Energy Subcommittee hearing in July. These efforts will enable taxpayers' funding to be used more efficiently. Given the current budgetary outlook of skyrocketing entitlement spending crowding out discretionary funding, it is imperative to maximize the value of limited tax dollars. DOE must prioritize its activities and assure each dollar is allocated effectively. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on how this can best be achieved. Mr. Chairman, I will yield to you later, and I am delighted to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. Thank you for holding this hearing. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of witnesses. The Department of Energy's Office of Science is the nation's largest supporter of research in the physical sciences, so it is impossible to overstate its important role that it will play in establishing our energy future and to our innovation enterprise. Our witnesses today will be able to speak in much greater detail about the office, but I want to start by highlighting just a few of the amazing activities that this program supports. The Basic Energy Sciences program builds and operates a number of major user facilities, including several massive light sources and neutron sources that allow us to examine new materials and to watch fundamental chemical and biological processes almost in real time. About 14,000 researchers across our country use these facilities each year. These users include not only Department of Energy scientists, but university scientists, as well as their students, as well as researchers from approximately 160 companies, including names like Boeing, Dow, Ford, General Electric, IBM, Merck, and Pfizer. I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that this program supports the Combustion Research Facility at Sandia National Laboratory, which has been working closely with U.S. engine manufacturers for more than 30 years to improve efficiency and reduce harmful emissions from internal combustion engines. As we touched on in a hearing earlier this year, the Office's Advanced Computing Research Program is supporting facilities and developing software tools that address our scientific community's major supercomputing needs today. And it is providing the scaffolding necessary to build the next generation of high-end computing systems for tomorrow. This capacity will enable researchers across the scientific arena, from materials science to climate change to astrophysics, to acquire unparalleled accuracy in their simulations and achieve research breakthroughs more rapidly than ever before. This is why I'm pleased to be an original co-sponsor of the bipartisan American Supercomputing Leadership Act, recently introduced by my colleague on the Science Committee, Mr. Halprin, and I'm encouraged to see its language incorporated in various versions of a reauthorization of the Office of Science. The Fusion Energy Sciences program supports research into plasma physics and the underlying engineering challenges of fusion energy systems. If successful, these efforts would provide us with a practically inexhaustible source of energy with almost zero environmental impact. And the nuclear and high energy physics programs allow us to make discoveries from the atomic all the way up to the cosmic levels, engaging human beings' innate curiosity about the origin and makeup of our universe and our place in it. I could spend my entire opening statement talking about the great research supported by the Office of Science, but I will spare all of you that. It is important to note that many of these programs and activities would not be possible without the world-class system of national laboratories supported by the Office. These labs are rightfully described as the backbone or crown jewels of our country's research and development infrastructure. They house facilities and provide capabilities that are impossible for academic or industrial research institutions to support on their own, and we know that they won't. They employ some of the world's brightest scientists and engineers, and they help train our country's next generation of researchers. I may be a bit partial toward the labs because I happen to have two in my district, Sandia and Lawrence Livermore, and just about a 3-iron away is the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, where Dr. Simon comes from, and we'll talk about shortly. But without a doubt, the research and technologies that come out of these labs have produced an immense return on investment for American taxpayers. Unfortunately, the funding levels in the draft legislation that the majority is asking us to consider is simply inadequate to allow the Office of Science to continue to support the great research and facilities that it does. At a first glance, one might believe that the majority's bill actually increases funding for the office. But a closer look reveals that it's actually a cut to the funding. Because the rate of inflation for research is approximately 3% annually, but the bill only provides year-to-year increases of 1 to 1.7%. In effect, it's a cut to the office's budget. I hope that we can work around this, increase the budget, and give the Office of Science the research and funding that it deserves. We hear a lot of talk about America being the greatest country in the world. I certainly believe that, and it certainly is. But if we want to maintain our leadership and standing in technology and innovation and the jobs that will come with it, we can't afford to continue to cut our research budgets, cede leadership on important areas like fusion to China and Russia, without any consideration of the impacts such cuts will have on our nation's competitiveness. I look forward to discussing these and other issues with the distinguished panel here. And Madam Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member and now recognize the chairman of the full committee on science, space, and technology, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also want to thank you for your statement and the ranking member for his statement, which I thought was largely positive, and I appreciate that. We may have a slight difference on funding, but I think overall we all are very encouraged by what the science, the Office of Science of the DOE does. The Department of Energy at its core is a science agency. Its science mission is carried out through its basic research activities executed by the Office of Science. This research provides the foundation for innovation that drives long-term economic growth and serves as a valuable investment in America's future. The impact of DOE basic research activities is evident in our daily lives. Thousands of lives have been saved by DOE-sponsored research that developed MRIs and non-invasive cancer detection methods. Technological revolutions such as smaller, faster computer processors and breakthrough discoveries in energy storage can be traced to DOE basic research programs. Today's hearing will focus on draft legislation titled Enabling Innovation for Science, Technology, and Energy in America Act, or Einstein America Act. Yes, we like acronyms. The Einstein America Act supports high-impact research that promotes economic innovation and revolutionary scientific research, such as the development of X-ray light sources and high-performance computing programs. It recognizes the role of discovery science programs, which explore the most fundamental questions about the nature of the universe. The discussion draft requires the Department of Energy to coordinate with other federal agencies to streamline workplace regulations. This reduces burdensome red tape and provides the national labs flexibility to more effectively and efficiently execute the department's mission. This ensures that American taxpayer dollars are better utilized and enables labs to do more with less. The Einstein America Act prioritizes science activities within the department. It provides for an almost 2% increase above current spending levels. The discussion draft and today's hearing served as a starting point in the legislative process. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony and to working with committee members to advance this bill. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now the chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentlelady from Texas, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing today, and I'd like to thank the witnesses as well for being here. The Department of Energy's Office of Science is actually the largest supporter of basic research in the physical sciences in the country, and it operates more than 30 national scientific user facilities whose applications go well beyond energy innovation. Our nation's top researchers from industry, academia, and other federal agencies use these facilities to examine everything from new materials that will better meet our military's needs to new pharmaceuticals that will better treat disease, or even to examine the fundamental building blocks of the universe. I believe that this stewardship of unique scientific research, including the nation's major national user facilities, is an important role that I hope the department will continue to make one of its highest priorities. I appreciate the majority's efforts today to shine a spotlight on the good work carried out by the Office of Science and to authorize many of its important programs. However, I do have some significant concerns about the funding levels in the majority's discussion draft, which essentially amounts to harmful cuts because they do not even keep up with the rate of inflation for research. These levels for fiscal year 2014 are actually less than the Senate appropriations mark and the administration's request levels by almost 9%. I'm also concerned with the language that is clearly aimed at shifting support away from critical activities that the office carries out to examine the science and impacts of climate change. That said, I believe there is common ground in our support for many of the office's programs. Yesterday, I was pleased to circulate a discussion draft of the America Competes Reauthorization Act of 2013 produced by my staff, which includes several similar provisions to the majority's draft. It also includes authorization for the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy and a number of important legislative changes that would accelerate technology transfer and improve the management of our national laboratories. With these two drafts in mind, I look forward to working with the majority and the science and technology community to seek out the common ground and to see if the concerns that I have raised can be reconciled. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Patricia DeMer, Deputy for Science Programs at the Office of Science, Department of Energy. Previously, she served as the Deputy Director for Science Programs at DOE. From 1995 to 2007, she served as the Director of the Office of Basic Energy Sciences at DOE. She also started her career at DOE as a postdoctoral fellow at Argonne National Laboratory in 1972. Welcome, Dr. DeMer. I would also now like to yield to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Swalwell, to introduce our second witness.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. Today I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Horst Simon, the Deputy Director at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Dr. Simon joined the laboratory in early 1996 as the Director of the National Energy Research Science Computing Center, and under his leadership, the center enabled important discoveries for research in fields ranging from global climate modeling to astrophysics. Dr. Simon is an internationally recognized expert in computer science and applied mathematics, and he received the Gordon Bell Prize for Parallel Processing Research twice, first in 1988 and again in 2009. He was also a member of the team that developed NASA's Advanced Supercomputing Parallel Benchmarks, a widely used standard for evaluating the performance of massively parallel computing systems. Dr. Simons holds an undergraduate degree in mathematics and a PhD in mathematics from the University of California at Berkeley, clearly a great university given how close it is to the 15th Congressional District. I also should personally note that during my last visit to Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, as I was nearing the end of the tour and had to go to another meeting, Dr. Simon had the unfortunate distinction of drawing the shortest straw, and his presentation was at the very end, and he was following me all the way out to the parking lot. He was so excited about the research and what he was working on that I'm happy to continue listening to you, Dr. Simon, by inviting you here to testify today in Congress, and I really appreciate the work you do for the Bay Area and the international science community. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman. It appears your enthusiasm is infectious, and you have infected the ranking member of this committee with your enthusiasm. And we appreciate that very much, Dr. Simon. Our third and final witness today is Dr. John Heminger, Chairman of the Basic Energy Science Advisory Committee for the Department of Energy. Dr. Heminger is the Vice Chancellor for Research and a Professor of Chemistry at the University of California, Irvine. Now, as our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. Okay, we're ready to begin. I now recognize Dr. DeMer for 5 minutes to present her testimony. Welcome, Dr. DeMer.
Thank you so much, Chairman Lummis, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the full committee and the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here today to represent DOE's Office of Science, often called the best-kept secret in town. For more than 6 decades, the Office of Science and its predecessors have been a U.S. and world leader in scientific discovery and innovation. We have led the world in high-performance computing. We helped drive the transition from using only those materials that are found in nature to the directed design of new materials at the atomic level. We have played an important role in initiating the modern biotechnology revolution through the creation of the Human Genome Project. We have pushed the frontiers of understanding the origins of matter and the universe, and we have built and operated dozens of large-scale scientific user facilities, which are major pillars of the U.S. scientific enterprise. Today, they serve 29,000 users annually. From the earliest accelerators in the 1930s to today's supercomputers and the linear coherent light source, the world's first hard X-ray laser, these facilities have redefined what is possible over and over again. As the federal agency funding the largest fraction of basic research in the physical sciences, we need to continue to provide the scientific research community with the tools and the opportunities for the future. Here are 6 or so areas of priority for us. The first is high-performance computing. No other nation has been as successful in scientific computing as the United States. The U.S. has more supercomputers on the list of top 500 machines than any other nation, and it has held this advantage since the list was first compiled in 1993. But our lead is precarious. To retain this lead, we are planning the next phase in high-performance computing, sometimes known as exascale computing or the Exascale Initiative. This is not simply a machine capable of 10 to the 18th operations per second. Rather, it is a journey to a new level of predictive design using computation. This will require advances in applied math, computer science, manipulation of big data, and the development of community codes so that we are ready on day one and that we are ready to be the first to benefit from these new machines. The second area is predictive design of materials. The energy systems of the future, whether they tap sunlight, store electricity, or make fuel by splitting water, will involve materials that convert energy from one form to another. New materials will require exquisite control and functionality, and they must be synthesized with precisely defined atomic arrangements. Of critical importance in doing this are our major scientific user facilities that probe materials at the atomic level, and these are the big light sources, the neutron scattering facilities, and the electron beam scattering facilities. As a partner to predictive design of materials is predictive design of biological systems. Understanding how genomic information is translated into functional capabilities will enable design of microbes and plants for sustainable biofuels production, improved carbon storage, and biological transformation of materials such as nutrients and contaminants in the environment. Next in line is scientific discovery and technology innovation through new funding constructs, often employing what we call team science. Examples are the bioenergy research centers, now in their second 5-year term, the Energy Frontier Research Centers, and the Energy Innovation Hubs. Next is Earth Systems Modeling. As a major supporter of the leading U.S. climate model, the Community Earth Systems Model, we recognize that today's models must be significantly improved to modernize the code, make the code compatible with our advanced high-performance computers, incorporate realistic biogeochemical systems, that's atmosphere, land, oceans, sea ice, and subsurface, improve resolution, and improve uncertainty quantification. Next is the fundamental nature of matter and energy. This is high-energy physics and nuclear physics. Understanding how the universe works by studying the properties and constituents of matter and energy, largely through the use of advanced accelerators and detectors, has been the responsibility of the Office of Science since the 1930s. Our scientific reach has now expanded through incorporation of underground science and cosmic science. In addition, we have taken on 2 new roles: stewardship of accelerator R&D for the nation and the isotope production program. Finally, the last important priority for us is harnessing plasmas, the 4th state of matter. Controlling matter at very high temperatures and densities builds the scientific foundation needed to develop a fusion energy source. Thank you, Chairman, and members. I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. DeMer. And my daughter she's in her 20s. She's obsessed with lists. And I can't wait to call her and tell her there is a list of the top 500 machines. And she will undoubtedly be checking it out before the end of the day. Thanks for your testimony. I now recognize Dr. Simon to present his testimony.
Chairwoman Loomis, Ranking Member Swalwell, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this important hearing and for inviting me to participate. I'd like to deviate from my script very slightly and mention that I'm a co-author of the top 500 list, so if there are specific questions on ranking supercomputers, I'd be very happy to answer these questions. As I was introduced, my name is Horst Simon. I'm the Deputy Director of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, a multi-program Department of Energy Office of Science laboratory managed by the University of California. Berkeley Lab has a very long and distinguished history of producing world-leading science, and today continues to be an international leader in many scientific fields and technology areas, from the mysteries of the universe to delivering new energy solutions. Considering the challenges that our nation is facing, there are few issues that are as critical to the nation's well-being as the vitality and productiveness of our innovation ecosystem. We do have a national ecosystem that is comprised out of universities, the national labs, and of course industry. And it's the interplay of these 3 components that make us so competitive and make us very unique. In my daily work, I encounter almost every week visitors from around the world, from Asia, from Europe, who come and visit the national labs and want to find out how does a national lab work, how do we interact with industry, how do we interact with universities, because that system is very difficult to build and difficult to replicate. All 3 pieces of the system, universities, industry, and national labs, are equally important and need to be supported. In my comments, I would like to focus on what the national labs do. There are 3 important contributions that the national labs make. One, as it has been mentioned already by my colleague Dr. DeMer, we operate large-scale scientific facilities. These are facilities that are unique, very large, very difficult to build, difficult to maintain and operate, and that require consistent support over many years. These facilities are unique, not just in the nation, but worldwide. They provide a tool for our scientists to engage in really innovative, new basic science and advance our state of knowledge. The second element is large-scale, multidisciplinary team science. Many of the challenges that we're facing today require the approaches that combine the input from very different disciplines. One example that was mentioned are, about the bioresearch centers. For example, the J-Bay Research Center in Berkeley involves scientists that have background in agriculture, that have backgrounds in chemical engineering, and that have backgrounds in biology. They work on a very challenging problem that will take many years to resolve, that is getting from cellulosic matter to biofuels. Bringing all of them together and solving on these large, challenging projects is a characteristic of the national labs. Third, I'd like to point out that the national labs have a very important element of education to do. We are supporting, for example, in Berkeley, close to 900 postdocs and graduate students. These are individuals who come through the national lab on an ongoing basis. We actually have each year of the order of several hundred students that spend some time at the lab. The labs have an important element for training and educating these students because they learn what the real problems are that the nation is facing and how the tools of science can be brought to bear on solving these problems. Even if they don't stay in the national lab system, they move on and become either academicians or work in industry and contribute to our innovative national ecosystem. So all three elements are equally important. I would like to conclude my testimony with a very personal comment. I came to the United States in the 1970s as a graduate student from Germany, and I received my PhD in 1982 in Berkeley. I had not planned to really stay here, but being a graduate student in one of the top universities, I found out very quickly that for a scientific career, the United States is the best place to be. I had spent some time in universities and industry and then came back to the national labs in 1995 and had a very, very productive career. I became a citizen a long time ago and very much enjoyed the support that you are providing to scientists like me that advanced my career, and I have hopefully contributed significantly to the American innovation ecosystem. The unfortunate statement that I have to make at the end of my testimony is that if I were to meet myself today, a graduate student getting a PhD in 2013, I'm not sure if I could tell him or her the same thing that was true 30 years ago. It's not clear to me that this country has all the tools in place to provide an environment to be a productive environment for scientific inquiry. Thank you.
Dr. Simon, thank you for your statement. I now recognize Dr. Heminger to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chair Lummis, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the Energy Subcommittee. My name is John Heminger. I'm Professor of Chemistry and Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of California at Irvine. I also serve as Chair of BSAC, the Basic Energy Sciences Advisory Committee of the Office of Science. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to provide my insight into the Office of Science and the Office of Basic Energy Sciences of DOE, and to provide information on the activities of the Basic Energy Sciences Advisory Committee. In 2005, the U.S. National Academy sounded an alarm about the erosion of our global scientific and technological leadership with the publication of the report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm. I think it is fair to say that a majority of a somewhat complacent U.S. public and science infrastructure was stunned by this report. The response was swift and aggressive as this committee and the Congress passed the America Competes Act of 2007, which was then reauthorized in 2010. Last month, the chancellors and presidents of over 200 U.S. universities sent an open letter to Congress and the President expressing their serious concerns about what they referred to as the increasing U.S. innovation deficit. Their call to action was echoed in a similar letter from over a dozen associations representing the U.S. high technology business community. The origin of the U.S. innovation deficit is clear. It is a direct result of our success. Since World War II, the U.S. federal government has invested heavily in all areas of fundamental science and technology. The result is the technologically sophisticated society we have today. Our success has not been lost on our global competition. especially countries in Asia and the European Union, are investing heavily in fundamental science and technology. We have taught them by example. The growing innovation deficit is nowhere more critical than in energy science and technology, where the U.S. is being challenged by increasingly sophisticated competitors. In my written testimony, I provided a concrete example, pointing out that the long-standing U.S. global leadership in large-scale science user facilities, such as those managed by the Office of Basic Energy Sciences, is being challenged as a result of major investments by countries in Europe. In my testimony, I described how the Basic Energy Sciences Advisory Committee provides advice to the Office of Science and the Office of Basic Energy Sciences. I have provided the committee with copies of reports that have resulted from 3 recent studies. Each report has specific findings and makes specific recommendations. I would like to take this opportunity to applaud the leadership of the Office of Science and the Office of Basic Energy Sciences for acting rapidly and effectively to implement the recommendations that resulted from these studies. Since I was asked in my invitation letter to do so, I would like to conclude with a few remarks regarding the draft language for the Einstein Act. I did provide a few observations in my written testimony. I would like to make 2 additional observations at this time. First, there are several examples in the draft legislation where specific areas of science are called out for attention, prioritizing them above other activities, and yet other important areas are not mentioned. One example is in the language associated with the Office of Biological and Environmental Research, which is given a broad charge, quote, to carry out a program of research, development, and demonstration in areas of biological system science and climate and environmental science, end quote. Yet only biological systems and genomic science and low-dose radiation research are addressed in detail in the draft legislation. Based on my own expertise, I would suggest that areas such as the development of a complete molecular level understanding of the chemistry that underlies environmental pollution such as smog production and climate change should receive an equal emphasis from this office, given the importance to energy technology in the U.S. I would also like to reiterate my concerns about the U.S. innovation deficit. I'm concerned that the slight increase in funding associated with the draft legislative language I was provided will not be sufficient to allow the U.S. to recapture our leadership role in many areas of energy science. Let me assure you that I and my colleagues in the U.S. science community recognize the complex and serious budget issues facing our country. However, I am convinced that strategic investments in fundamental science research and education will be part of the solution, not of the problem. I want to thank you once again for your leadership and historical support of U.S. science and technology, and also for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panel. And now the members will begin asking their questions, and the chair yields herself 5 minutes to begin the questioning. And of course, I'm going to start with something that's near and dear to my heart. As a graduate of the University of Wyoming and later someone who was involved in state government in Wyoming, I was on something called the EPSCoR Coordinating Committee, the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, which is a DOE program in part, Office of Science, and it provides limited funding to states that don't receive substantial funding for their universities. Wyoming is an EPSCoR state, as I mentioned, and so I was on the panel that got to vet and approve proposed EPSCoR projects and advance them to DOE and to the National Science Foundation for funding recommendations. DOE has proposed scaling back funding to the state, so my first question is for you, Dr. DeMer. Many of the EPSCoR states are leading states in energy exploration and energy production. And that is certainly true of my state of Wyoming. Because of their limited funding, and in spite of our massive contributions to the nation's energy security, what's your view on the role of the EPSCoR program, and how can energy-producing states become more competitive in receiving funding through the Office of Science?
Thank you very much for the question. As it turns out, I know quite a lot about EPSCoR. When I came to the Department of Energy in 1995 to lead BES, Basic Energy Sciences, the EPSCoR program had sort of accidentally had a lapse in funding. It was not funded out of my office. My division directors at the time were so committed to EPSCoR that we took over the EPSCoR program and we funded it out of our base program because of that commitment. So I've known the EPSCoR program for a very long time. It does outstanding work. We are very committed to that program. We work in partnership with all the other offices in the Office of Science and offices elsewhere to see if we can find partnering funds to increase the funding that goes to EPSCoR states. We try very innovative funding mechanisms to see if we can get individual investigators at EPSCoR states to become part of the program. We have worked very hard. The program has a checkered history of funding in the Congress, ups and downs, but we are committed to keeping that stable and to increase it at roughly the same rate that the other base programs in the basic energy sciences increase.
U.S. Senator Conrad Burns from Montana was very much instrumental in founding the EPSCoR program and was its main champion. So when he was no longer in the U.S. Senate, I think that it dropped as a priority with some senators, which may have contributed to the fits and starts in terms of funding. So we miss him as a leader in the EPSCoR community, at least in Congress, and I appreciate your response to the question. Dr. Simon, what opportunities exist to have DOE and specifically its site offices reduce day-to-day micromanagement of lab operations? Now, and what would the resulting impact be on the labs?
I think we're facing an overall trend of increasing oversight by DOE in many different aspects of our operations. I think in terms of interacting with our sponsors in headquarters with respect to science, the interactions are very good, but when it comes to issues such as EH&S or other operational opportunities, I think the laboratories would be in a better position if they would have more autonomy, less oversight. And I can mention as an example what I put in my written testimony, the topic of DOE's self-management of environmental health and safety. We are just like any other large-scale industrial enterprise, and so we could have been easily also been provided oversight by OSHA, yet DOE has its own sets of rules, and we have to comply to these rules. These rules are sometimes very restrictive and very burdensome. I have a longer description of that issue that I'm willing to submit in written testimony.
A follow-up question then. If day-to-day oversight of lab operations is reduced, how can the national labs be held accountable for their stewardship of American taxpayer-supported investments? And so you have flexibility, but we have accountability.
Yes. The national labs are operated by management by companies or universities that have a contract to operate the national lab. The contract has requirements, and these requirements can be enforced and oversight through annual reporting mechanisms, through reports back to the sponsors, and can be also reviewed on an ongoing basis. That is different from describing on a daily basis on how particular instances of our operation need to be carried out in terms of what level of inspections need to be done, what level of support needs to be put into a particular operation. So I think the outcome-oriented management is important as opposed to the regulated operational management.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. I gave myself a very generous 5 minutes, and we'll do the same for our ranking member. I recognize the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. The research community often cites sustained growth and predictable funding as being among their top priorities. Not surprisingly, private industry cites predictability as one of its top priorities. And a necessity if we really want the United States to continue to be a world leader in technology and innovation. Dr. Heminger's testimony specifically refers to the innovation deficit that the United States is experiencing. And as I discussed in my opening statement, while I appreciate the majority's draft and its aims to improve the authorization of several important programs and activities carried out by the Office of Science, I have concerns about the draft's funding profile. It supports budget levels that are below research inflation rates, so they are effectively cuts, and 9% below the bipartisan Senate appropriations mark for the Offices of Science. I'm also concerned that the funding profile in this draft runs for only 2 years rather than a much longer time. I would prefer something like 5 years to give more certainty to the laboratories and those partners in the Office of Science. Dr. Heminger, do you think that a short-term 2-year reauthorization that cuts the office's budget provides the certainty and stability that the research community needs, and how does this help to increase the innovation deficit?
Thank you very much for that question. You know, I think that it's widely recognized that predominant programs that are run by the Office of Science, in particular the Office of Basic Energy Sciences, are addressing long-term questions and long-term issues. These are not science questions that one can expect answers to in very short periods of time, and I think that the only way that a short-term reauthorization works is with the expectation that the U.S. government isn't going to go out of business and fall off a cliff and so on. And so you know, I think it certainly would be advantageous to have a longer reauthorization bill, and I think this is particularly a problem or an issue with respect to the large science facilities. In my written testimony, I pointed out the issue of the international competition with respect to our global leadership for X-ray light sources and other facilities, and these are really major long-term projects that require stability in terms of funding and authorization. I would encourage the committee to support that.
Thank you, Dr. Heminger. Dr. Simon, what are your thoughts on funding and length of funding, or length of authorization?
As I said in my opening statement, the national laboratories have long-term projects in research and have large-scale facilities that require a predictable continued operation. It is very difficult in both instances to have a very highly variable budget that changes from year to year and that is not predictable. With respect to large facilities, the issue is that ongoing upgrades, plans may need to have postponed at an increased cost to the taxpayer later on. With respect to research projects, the high variability in funding makes it very difficult to plan personnel. And we're talking here about highly critical talent that if it is, if junior researchers, if postdocs see that there's uncertainty about funding, about the longevity of a project, they will go elsewhere and leave the national lab and weaken our innovation ecosystem. Thank you.
And Dr. Simon, could you talk a little bit about some of the other federal agencies and private sector users that you have at Lawrence Berkeley? We have heard that DOE labs are using or having other agencies like NIH, NSF, and NASA use their laboratories, and I know from touring LBL that there are private sector partnerships as well. Can you talk about who those users are and how they are benefiting the technology transfer to the private market?
Thank you for the question. So let me first talk about other federal agencies. The national user facilities that are operated by the Office of Science are available to all researchers, that is university, national labs, and industry researchers. So we have, for example, at the Advanced Light Source in Berkeley, a large number of researchers funded by NIH. These are biologists who are interested in determining the structures of large biomolecules of proteins. There are significant examples of major progress that has been obtained using the DOE facilities. For example, a research project that just completed a couple of months ago is looking at the structure of the influenza of the flu virus. As you know, the viruses are mutating rapidly, and there is still a quest for finding a common vaccine that would address all these flu viruses. So in order to understand this, one has to look at the structure. There's a major project that was completed that identified, that was NIH funded, that used VLS to identify the structure of many of these viruses. With respect to NASA, I could mention an example of a collaboration between the Department of Energy, the Office of High Energy Physics, with NASA to collaborate on an astrophysics project called the Planck Project, which is an exploration of the cosmic microwave background radiation, where both agencies have worked together, and the supercomputing center, NERSC, in Berkeley, is actually the data repository for the Planck data.
Thank you. And Dr. Simon, I've gone over
yes,
on my time.
I haven't gotten to industry, but I'll be happy
yes,
to answer that.
And hopefully we can get back to that. He's so passionate. He has so much to talk about, Chair. Thank you.
And we're delighted for that. So we are going to have a generous clock today. The chair now recognizes Mr. Halprin, the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. Thank you all for being here, and I really do appreciate the work that you're doing. I hope you know from us, certainly from me, my passion for the work of the Office of Science and how key the work of the Office of Science is to determine our competitiveness on the world stage. And just absolutely convinced that we must right now be committed to maintaining our leadership in basic scientific research so that we can continue our leadership on the world stage as far as being an innovative nation going forward. I also have great privilege of representing Fermilab, many of the brilliant physicists, scientists at Fermilab, Department of Energy employees at Fermilab, as well as many scientists over at Argonne. So I see firsthand the incredible impact that our laboratories have on the communities where they are located, but much larger than that, the impact that they have on our university systems. I travel to all of my universities around Illinois and am just amazed at the incredible opportunity that our students have working with our national laboratories to do truly groundbreaking research. And what a great opportunity. But then even beyond that, to see something like Fermilab, where I think the numbers I saw was 39,000 K through 12th graders are impacted every single year by Fermilab through programs there, through work with teachers, by scientists going into the schools. Incredible impact, and I am absolutely convinced that we must continue our commitment to basic scientific research in our national laboratories if we are going to be a great nation going forward with great opportunities for our kids and our grandkids to be able to learn and study here, but also apply that knowledge for new discovery here in America. So thank you. A couple questions I had. Dr. DeMer, wanted to ask you your thoughts on the long-term future of the department's high energy physics programs as it continues to regain its leadership role on the international level. There's no question that the U.S. was essential in experiments at CERN with programs like the LHC and ATLAS, but wondered what is next and what your thoughts are on the long-base neutrino experiment and our unique underground research space in South Dakota and Minnesota. What does America have to lose if we do not begin to act on this, and how can we leverage international funding to realize the potential discoveries that it has to bring?
Well, thank you for the question. I spent 23 years at Argonne National Laboratory just down the road from Fermilab. Fermilab is one of our most important laboratories. As you well know, it is transitioning now from work at the energy frontier to work in the so-called intensity frontier. The accelerator and detector expertise at Fermilab is going to be critical to make the United States world leading in the intensity frontier. We need very intense beams. We need very high precision detectors in order to do that. Fermilab will be at the forefront of doing that. Right now, as you probably well know, there was a very large meeting called the Snowmass meeting in Minnesota.
Yes.
That went on for a couple of weeks with about 500, 700 participants. That's going to be followed very closely now by an advisory committee study. Our expectation is that that study will be done in the spring, and that's going to inform not only the future of high-energy physics, but it will. We hope that it will also endorse a very vibrant future for Fermilab. As you well know, there's a new laboratory director at Fermilab, Nigel Lockyer, who is extremely talented, very aggressive, and so we're looking forward to a very good future for high-energy physics and the laboratory.
Good, and I hope there is a specific commitment with the long baseline neutrino experiment. I think we're in a unique position there on the forefront. If we let that slip away, there's certainly other nations that are willing to step in, like has happened in other areas where we haven't followed through on opportunities that we've had, and we've seen focus come away from America and go over to Europe or other places. I really think it is so important that we don't let this slip away. Dr. DeMer and Dr. Simon, if I could get your thoughts. Earlier this year, DOE prepared a roadmap to develop exascale computing systems that I had the opportunity to sit down and discuss with Director Muniz on. I wondered if you could summarize the key findings and recommendations and also let the committee know what ways DOE and non-DOE stakeholders can collaborate and utilize this capability.
Thank you for the question about exascale. Let me state first that I believe moving towards exascale is an incredibly important opportunity for the Department of Energy Office of Science, but not just the Office of Science, other parts of DOE and NSA, and the U.S. research community in general to maintain leadership in high-performance computing. It is a path towards exascale, and it's not an ultimate goal to get to this point. The reason why that is because I think there are fundamental changes that are currently happening in computer technology. You all are aware of technology shrinking, becoming more available at the iPhone level. These type of changes fundamentally alter the landscape of computing, and so we have to, what exascale really is about is envisioning is how the computer landscape will look in 10 or 15 years. A good analogy is the early 1990s when there was a high-performance computing initiative, HPCC, that was a very well-coordinated, well-funded initiative with a National Coordination Office which allowed all the agencies that have interest in computing to work together. I still look back to this time and say this should be a model for exascale. We should look at this as a challenge that is not just for the Department of Energy but for other agencies as well, because whoever will control this technology in the near term will have a long-term economic advantage in the computing world.
I agree with you. My time has expired. If I do have some more questions, if it would be all right, we can follow up in writing and get your response. Dr. DeMer would love to hear your thoughts on the exascale computing work that we see as important, but also some other things. With that, I yield back. Chairman, thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you.
And thank you for your expertise and enthusiasm for this topic. We're always impressed with your presence and your commitment to this subject. So, Mr. Halprin, my compliments. I will now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski. He and I came up on the elevator today, and we were both concerned that we were late and enthusiastically rushing to this committee. So the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you. There's so many things to talk about here. Let me quickly get to it, and some things I might leave for follow-up questions for the record. First, I want to say that I'm glad to see the Congressman Halprin's bill, which I co-sponsored on high-performance computing, has been incorporated into the discussion draft. I know it's vitally important that we keep up investments in high-performance computing that push the boundaries of what's possible and keep us on a path towards exascale computing, as we were just talking about. I've seen firsthand how impressive these high-performance computing projects are by visiting the DeMer supercomputer at Argonne, which is in my district. So it's great to have Argonne there. It's a great example of what we can do and what we should be doing more of. I may come back, or may for the record ask Dr. DeMer about the EPSCoR program. But I just wanted to move on to talking about tech transfer. It's been one of my top priorities since I've been in Congress, making it easier to get these research findings that then become new technologies, new inventions, get them out of the lab and into the market. Our national labs have been real leaders in this space, as many of them have taken money that they received from licensing agreement and put it towards funds that help accelerate the commercialization of new technologies. Still, I think more can and should be done both at the labs and at DOE. I want to ask Dr. DeMer, can you talk about how the Office of Science approaches technology transfer and how you look to partner with the labs primarily funded by the Office of Science in these activities?
Well, I'll tell you briefly what the Office of Science is doing in our SBIR program. We have a new part of that program called TTO, Technology Transfer Opportunities, and it allows applicants to the SBIR program to use technologies or R&D results from our laboratories in their work and the SBIR grants. And having looked just recently, a couple of days ago, at the latest funding opportunity announcement from the SBIR program, there are dozens of technology transfer opportunities noted in that for applicants. So we are aggressively working with our laboratories, also our universities, but mostly the laboratories, to take the results of their R&D and move them to small businesses. I also want to comment on what the Secretary is doing, Secretary Moniz. He is very interested in reducing barriers to the laboratories working with small business and industry. And his Lab Policy Council, which was just established and had its first meeting last week, was devoted about 50% of the time to talking with lab directors and others about how we can reduce barriers and make it easier to do exactly what you're saying.
Very good. It's great to hear those things. I think I'm sure there's more that we can do. One thing I'm interested in is having DOE participate in the Innovation Core program, and that's something I'd like to continue to talk about. One other thing I wanted to get to right now is flexibility for the labs. And I think there is a need to have more flexibility. I'm glad to see that the language in the bill expands the use of ACT agreements that can be entered into between labs and small businesses without an extra layer of review from the DOE. It's a good start, and I applaud DOE for working with the labs on a pilot program for these agreements. But I want to ask Dr. DeMer if DOE is looking at other areas from tech transfer to facilities construction where perhaps the labs could be given a bit more leeway in what they are doing for the more minor decisions. I understand the need to follow DOE's lead on larger strategic investments is always going to be there, but in terms of giving a little more flexibility to the labs.
Yes, that's one of the things that's actually concerned me for a long time. Sometimes it's called atomization of budgets, where budgets are put out in very small amounts. One of the things that we've done in the Office of Science is we've created funding constructs that put money to the laboratories, in fact, even to the universities, in much larger amounts. And having a larger amount of funding to work with gives the labs that flexibility. And examples are the nanoscale science research centers, 5 of them, that we put in place about 10 years ago now, the first one not quite 10 years ago. That's a $25 million budget item, and the labs have flexibility to use that, subject to annual or biannual or triennial review. The Energy Frontier Research Centers, the Bioenergy Research Centers, and the Energy Innovation Hubs are all constructs that put funding to the performers, largely, in many cases, largely to the laboratories, in chunks of money that give the lab just this kind of flexibility and discretion in spending that you're talking about. I think that is something that I started almost 10 years ago when I was in basic energy sciences, and I'm pleased to see is continuing. I also don't like to see too many constraints put on laboratories with too small amounts of money.
Thank you very much. And just very briefly, I just want to bring everyone's focus back to 2 things that Dr. Simon said. One is the great cooperation we have in this country, universities, the national labs, industry. We need to not only appreciate that, we need to do what we can at what we can at the federal level to help to continue and to help grow those. And I was glad Dr. Simon pointed those things out. And also the last thing that you had said in your testimony, Dr. Simon, about the future and what the future looks like for young scientists today. And I think we all need to focus on that and do what we can to make sure that we continue to be the place that young scientists want to come to and to stay. So thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois, and the chair will now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano. You know, our California members make that long trek every week that our witnesses from California made today, and so they're grateful for your willingness to come this far. I now recognize Mr. Takano.
Thank you. I know our chair travels from the great, wonderful state of Wyoming. Beautiful state. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fortunate to represent UC Riverside, a top-notch research university in the Empire, a sister school to both Berkeley and Irvine. I want to get straight into the questions. Dr. DeMer, in the majority's draft authorization of the Office of Science, the biological and environmental research program is directed to, quote, prioritize fundamental research on biological systems and genomic science over the rest of the portfolio. This is clearly a way to implicitly say, take money from climate and environmental research. Do you support this language in the discussion draft?
No, we do not support that. The climate and environmental sciences part of biological and environmental research is extremely important, and we do not want to disadvantage that in the way that the language in the majority bill has been interpreted.
Thank you. Dr. Simon.
I concur with this answer, and I'd just like to add that the environmental and climate research in the Office of Biological Environmental Research is an important and integral part of the DOE mission. We shouldn't really think of, say, climate as a standalone enterprise, but think about how it interacts with other parts of the program. For example, climate science allows us to predict rainfall, precipitation in the West. That ties into the availability of water. The availability of water, again, has energy impacts in terms of how hydropower will be generated, how water will be used in energy technologies. So the Department of Energy is uniquely situated to explore not just climate in itself, but the interaction of climate with the ecosystem, and in a situation where this fundamental research can lead to important insights for our future.
Thank you. Dr. Heminger, I believe you sort of stated your opinion in your opening statement. Would you care to add anything?
No, I just want to say that, as I said in my opening statement, I think it's a mistake to try to legislatively prioritize topics within the office when important topics such as the environmental sciences at sort of a really molecular level understanding are so important.
These sciences are so important to my district and Southern California in general, where there's actually 7 or 8 congressional districts the size of several states that suffer from air quality issues. And our understanding of these, the way in which environmental, how the environment interacts with climate is very important to us. Dr. Simon, you mentioned the fact that you became an American citizen, that you saw this country as a place for you and a future for you in science. And you say you could no longer really say that to a graduate student today, or I'm assuming that's what you were thinking. Can you explain a little more what you were talking about?
Thank you for the question. I think if I look at the steady state to date, if I look at what the research facilities are, what the infrastructure is, what our educational institutions are, what our opportunities are to work with industry, how industry is working with us, America is still very clearly number one. However, what I'm concerned about is the trend. And just to give a very recent example, if we have issues such as sequestration, which means that we have to look at future staffing, if we look at the partial shutdown where uncertainty goes through the system, what we're signaling to the next generation of scientists is that the future of science in the country is no longer as certain as it was. we're sending a very strong signal saying, yes, there is a great infrastructure here, there is the opportunity here to work with top minds in the field, but we cannot guarantee you that 30 years from now that situation will be the same, because if we're on a path of continued reduction in funding, continued uncertainty about the longevity of some of the research projects, somebody who has to stake a 30-year career will have to very carefully look where he or she will go.
So many of our top, bright graduate students might place a bet on other countries that seem to have a different trajectory.
Yes, I think we are at a inflection point where it could very well be that some of our brightest researchers will look elsewhere, in particular looking at Europe. From my personal experience, I would say, in particular in my field, to put this in historical context, in 1980 there was no doubt about the differential between what was happening in America and what is happening in Europe. Today I would say Europe has pulled up and is in many areas, even in some areas, even ahead of us.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and we will have an opportunity for those of us who are here to ask a second round of questions, and we're going to limit the time. So the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Halprin, who has a bill on the floor, and we're delighted you were able to stay this long. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chairman. Dr. DeMer, I'll follow up with the question I'd asked Dr. Simon, just in regards to exascale computing, if there's any shortly key findings, recommendations, or if there's things way that DOE and non-DOE stakeholders can collaborate to utilize this capability.
Yes, let me just say what's happening inside DOE. Secretary Moniz, you said you spoke with him, is very strongly supportive of this, and he is having NNSA and the Office of Science work collaboratively with the community to make sure that the exascale program, and as Dr. Simon said, it's not an endpoint, it's a journey, a 10-year journey to a computer this large, is successful. He's also asked his advisory board, the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, to listen to the presentations from the department and from others, and to provide him with advice on the path forward. This is one of the very highest priorities in the Department of Energy right now.
Okay, thank you. Dr. DeMer, different subject. In your testimony, you stated that HEP is the steward of accelerator R&D technology for DOE. Wonder if you can just discuss the interagency collaboration on this technology, where it lies in the draft legislation, and the benefits accelerator research has for America.
High energy, the Office of High Energy Physics has been very aggressive in the last couple of years, reaching out to others, NIH, medical community, all communities that use accelerators, to find out how we can help them. As you know, the state of Illinois built IARC at Fermilab, and that's another way that we're going to reach out to non-traditional users of accelerators to see how we in the high energy physics program through the laboratories can help others who need accelerator technology but don't have the expertise to do it themselves.
Okay, thank you. Last question I'll ask Dr. DeMer. There's a couple different parts to it, but the United States is currently a partner in ITER, more than $20 billion international project to demonstrate the concept of fusion energy. Unfortunately, this project has been plagued by delays, increased cost estimates, and poor project management. And I understand more bad news may be on the way in terms of our European partners' ability to meet their project obligations. Dr. DeMer, do you have full confidence in the construction and financing of ITER within a reasonable time frame and cost structure?
Well, let me answer that in a slightly different way. As you know, in the 2014 budget, which is now before Congress, the Department of Energy capped its contribution to ITER at $225 million a year with a $2.4 billion cap to get it to first plasma. We're waiting the results of a couple of reviews now. One of them is an international review of the management of the project at the international organization, the IO, and the other is an Office of Project Assessment, sometimes called a layman review. And based on the results of those two reviews, we will take another look at how we are approaching ITER.
you kind of touched on this, but wonder if you could maybe a little bit further just describe any upcoming project milestones and how the department will evaluate its future participation in contributing to EATR.
Well, we're responsible, the U.S. part of EATR, the U.S. Project Office, U.S. IPO, is responsible for certain deliverables, and we review progress toward meeting those deliverables on a regular basis through the Office of Project Assessment, and that tells us about how we're doing. The management, so-called management assessment, which won't be released until late November, will tell us a little bit about how the EATR Project Office in France is doing. And again, based on the results of those two reviews, we'll take a look at what our position is going to be.
What were the dates on that again of when you would expect?
Late November is the council meeting, okay, and the management assessment will be briefed to the EATR Council at that point. Okay.
I think for us, I think you understand this, our responsibility certainly to see the department do well and be in the forefront of some important work, but also making sure that we're being responsible for the taxpayer dollars. And so just kind of in conclusion, just ask for, will you assure the committee that you will continue to be vigilant in protecting taxpayer dollars from waste and cost overruns? Is it specifically associated with EATR to the point of considering U.S. withdrawal from the project if necessary?
Yes, we will do that.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to jump ahead a little bit in the line here. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chairman Lummis. Dr. Simon, could you complete your remarks from earlier about private industry partners that your laboratory has been working with and how you see their work transferring out to the private sector and creating jobs, helping the economy, making us more energy independent?
Thank you for the question. I would like to follow up on this. Yes, there are, of course, several individual collaborations of our laboratory with private industry. There are the standard ways of transferring technology through licensing and intellectual property right agreements. I could mention a couple of exciting examples. Dr. DeMer mentioned previously the nanoscience centers. We now have 10 years later the first examples of technology coming out of nanoscience centers that's actually used in industry in terms of small company startups that using very innovative ideas to build new products. I can mention a small company that has just started, Heliotrope, that is using a nano coating on windows that makes windows electrochromic, so you can switch them on and off. In winter, you make the windows bright, so sun can go in and heat stays inside. In summer, you switch in reverse, and this is by the flip of a switch. Of course, this is technology that is proven in the lab. It will take years to make it a real product. But this is the path that we have from basic research at the lab to an actual innovation that could change maybe in 10 years or so how we build houses. More fundamentally, I think I would mention two other things. One area is so-called work for others. The labs engage in projects that are funded by industry. It's a very important element because it allows industry to work directly with us, sponsor work at the lab, and benefit from the investment that the Department of Energy has made. It would be very desirable if this work for other projects could be made a bit easier to implement, and maybe the labs would have authority to, in particular, sponsor small work for other projects quickly without DOE oversight. That's important because often we work with small companies that cannot wait for 8 or 9 months to get approval. Those companies need commitments from VCs or have other constraints, so speed is of the essence. A third area that I would like to mention is the use of the national user facilities. These are open to industry. Industry has worked with the national user facilities. As an example, the Advanced Light Source has a very long-term agreement with Sematech exploring extreme ultraviolet technology for its technology for future generation of chips. Large companies and consortia like Sematech know how to do this. I think what we need to do is find a way of getting small, medium-sized enterprises better access to our facilities. And again, reducing paperwork, making it easy and efficient, and possibly even providing support for small and medium-sized companies to access the facilities.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Simon. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I have a kind of a follow-up question about the Einstein America bill draft as it relates to signature authority on agreements for non-federal entities. The discussion draft delegates signature authority on agreements under $500,000. Is there a threshold which may provide for added flexibility to the national labs while preserving the department's oversight responsibilities for larger projects? And I open this question to any of our panelists.
Yes, we noted that provision, and that's something that actually I think we may have to talk with General Counsel about, because that adds to the contract of the laboratory, and I'm not sure what role DOE can relinquish in doing something like that. I understand the sense of this, that is to give the labs more flexibility and more freedom to work quickly. As I mentioned earlier, one of my goals is to give the labs more flexibility in research dollars by putting out dollars in larger amounts and letting the M&O contractor manage that. I think the same philosophy holds for work for others and technology transfer, and I think there are mechanisms that the Secretary would like to put in place to do that. I'm not sure that this is one of them, but we'll certainly explore it.
Okay. Dr. Simon, is $500,000 a good threshold from your perspective?
It is certainly a good threshold, but I think $1 million would be better.
Okay, and I hear you. Thank you for your candor. Dr. Heminger, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would just agree with Dr. Simon. Coming from the University of California, which is part of the contract management for several of the labs, I think this would be an important step if it is legal, right?
Well, we make it legal.
Yeah, well, very good. So, I think that moving in this direction would be positive.
Okay. Let me ask just as my final question, is there anything that you would like to share with us that we have not asked? So I leave the option to say something that's a burning answer that you wish you could leave us today with.
Well, I'd like to add something to the discussion that we've had already today on the funding levels in the Einstein Act. One of the things that I noted over the weekend when I was poring over numbers was that the authorization in the 2010 Competes Act for fiscal year 2013 was a hair over $6 billion for the Office of Science. And when we see something like that, we tend to plan toward something of that order of magnitude. The actual appropriation was $4.6 billion. So we're significantly below what the authorization was. And it's very hard to plan. When I was the Director of Basic Energy Sciences for all those years, for 12 years, I carried with me a single sheet of paper, and that single sheet of paper was a 10-year projection for what the Basic Energy Sciences program would do in construction and in research. It was a single Excel spreadsheet. And those years, we didn't have a huge amount of funding, but we knew what was coming, or we could plan what was coming. And today, there would be no way that you could carry a spreadsheet like that because things change so much. So.
Dr. Simon?
Thank you for the opportunity to comment freely. I, of course, support very much what Dr. DeMer said. I would like to draw your attention to another topic that is very, very important for the future. Many of our national laboratories were created and formed in the time after the Second World War, and are really still in the legacy of the atomic age as far as their physical infrastructure is concerned. We have, for example, in Berkeley Lab, the average age of buildings is more than 50 years. We're an 80-year-old lab, so you can really see from this that there was a big building boom in the 50s and 60s, and we're still in buildings that are by now outdated, in many cases no longer safe. There's a program in the Office of Science called the Science Lab Infrastructure, which allows for gradual renovation of buildings, upgrades, and also doing important things in California, such as earthquake safety. We're very supportive of this program because it is the best way of accomplishing a gradual upgrade of very old and aging facilities. In addition to that, of course, we understand that we're in a time of very constrained budgets. It would be very helpful if we could find innovative and quick ways to use other sources of funding. For example, the laboratories would be very interested to use third-party financing for buildings, and we would like to work with the Office of Science and DOE to find quick ways to accomplish this within the existing framework. So infrastructure is important as much as people and scientific facilities.
Dr. Heminger.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to make some general comments. I'd like to come back to the concept of the importance of the Office of Science with respect to dealing with what I call the innovation deficit. I think this is a really critical issue for the United States, and we have not yet approached, I think, the problem that led, for example, to the brain drain out of Europe after World War II. But I think we are seeing a situation which could, in fact, lead to that, as Dr. Simon has mentioned. One of the things that I think has not yet been pointed out is the tremendous and unique, capability or asset that the United States has with respect to the staff at the national labs, and not just the staff but the users at the national lab facilities. The light sources, for example, that the Office of Basic Energy Sciences manages have on the order of 12,000 users annually, and this is really a unique worldwide asset that that the U.S. has that we should continue to support. And I guess I'd like to finish just by thanking the committee again for its strong support for science over the years and for the opportunity to be here today.
I thank the gentleman and the panel, and certainly you passed our test, Dr. Heminger. We have those bells and whistles come on while you're speaking so we can test your ability to focus, and you passed our test swimmingly, so thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. DeMer is a former high school teacher. Improving STEM and STEAM education is one of my top priorities. We must ensure we're preparing our students and teachers to succeed in the 21st century. Overall, what will the role of the Department of Energy be in furthering STEM education, especially as it relates to meeting future energy workforce development needs?
Yes, the major role that we play is the support of graduate students through our grants program. However, we also have a program called Workforce Development for Teachers and Scientists. I know this program well because I'm actually the director of it, and in addition to the other things I do. That program places 1,000 people a year at the labs for internships. It's undergraduate students, a new graduate program that will place graduate students for periods of 3 months to up to 2 years at the laboratories to do their work, and visiting faculty and students that they might bring with them. So through this program, the Department of Energy Office of Science hopes to get students and faculty engaged in laboratory research, seeing the laboratories as an excellent place to have a career or an excellent place to collaborate with staff at the laboratories. Like Dr. Simon, when I was getting out of graduate school, I really had no knowledge of what the laboratories were or what they did or what the workforce was like. I had a postdoc at Argonne National Laboratory. I thought it would be a couple of years. It turned out to be 23 years. And unless we bring people into the laboratories and let them understand what those laboratories do, I don't think that we will have as vibrant a workforce as we might have. So this is a very important program to us. STEM is very important to us.
The Computational Science Graduate Fellowship Program, which is a partnership between the DOE Office of Science and the DOE National Security Administration, is widely considered to be a success in meeting the DOE National Laboratories computational science workforce needs. Under the President's budget proposal, will this program still be administered by the NSF?
We don't know what the implementation of the consolidation of the STEM programs is going to look like because that hasn't been fully explored. I agree with you that the Computational Sciences Graduate Fellowship Program is one of the outstanding fellowship programs that we have run for over 20 years. It has reviewed outstandingly, and it is essentially the who's who of computational sciences have gone through that program. So that is one of our concerns in the consolidation.
Great. Madam Chair, I have no further questions. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I thank all of our members who attended this hearing today, and I particularly want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony. The members of this committee may have additional questions for you. I know Mr. Halprin had suggested he may follow up with some of you in writing. There may be other members of the committee who will do so. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. And with our gratitude for our fine panel today, for your attendance and for your thoughtful responses to our questions, and our gratitude once again, this hearing is adjourned.